I never saw it coming. Not in a million years. My name is Linden, and for most of my life, I believed in the kind of love that stands the test of time. The kind where two people build something unshakable, something that outlasts every storm. My wife, Corinne, was my world. We had been together for almost a decade, and though no marriage is perfect, I thought we had something real, something rare. But now, as I sit here staring at the hollow space in our closet where her dresses used to be, as I trace the outline of where her perfume bottles once stood on the bathroom counter, I realize how little I actually understood. It all started on a seemingly ordinary evening. The kind where you don't realize your whole world is about to shift. We had just finished dinner, something simple, homemade. I was washing the dishes while she sat at the kitchen island, sipping on a glass of wine. There was something about her that night. A nervous energy. The way she kept swirling the stem of her glass between her fingers, biting her lip as if holding something back. I should have known. She set her glass down with a soft clink and exhaled. "Linden," she said, her voice gentle. Too gentle. "Can we talk about something?" I wiped my hands on a dish towel and turned to her. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated. A long pause. Then she smiled. Not the kind of smile that came easily to her, but the kind she used when she was trying to soften the blow. "I've been thinking," she started, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass again. "You and I, we love each other. We trust each other. And I know we've always been open about our needs." A pit formed in my stomach. Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. "Where are you going with this?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She inhaled deeply, her shoulders rising and falling. "I want to explore something new," she said, watching me carefully. "I've been reading a lot about open marriages, about how couples can grow closer by allowing each other more freedom." There it was. The words I never thought I'd hear from my wife's lips. For a moment, I couldn't process it. I could hear the words, see her mouth forming them, but my mind refused to connect them to reality. "Freedom?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. "Not because I don't love you, but because I do. Because I believe in us enough to know we can handle this. It's not about replacing what we have, it's about enhancing it." I gripped the edge of the counter, feeling my nails press into the cool stone. "And what if I don't want that?" She reached for my hand, her touch warm, almost pleading. "I just want us to talk about it, to consider it. I don't want this to be a me decision. I want it to be our decision." But was it? Was it really? Because sitting there in that moment, I already knew. This wasn't a question. It was a door she had already walked through, waiting for me to follow. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, all of them colliding into one another. What had I missed? Had she already been seeing someone? Was she unhappy with me? I replayed every conversation, every intimate moment, looking for cracks I hadn't noticed before. By morning, I still had no answers. Just an empty, gnawing feeling that something inside me had started to unravel, and I had no idea how to stop it. Morning light filtered through the blinds, cutting the bedroom into sharp lines of warmth and shadow. I hadn't slept. Corinne, on the other hand, lay curled beneath the blankets, breathing steadily, as if she had just asked me if we should get a new rug for the living room, and not whether I wanted to turn our marriage into a playground for strangers. I sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to untangle the mess of emotions in my head. Confusion, hurt, maybe even anger, though I wasn't sure at who. Myself? Her? The universe for laughing in my face? I got up, went to the kitchen, and poured myself a cup of coffee. I stood there for a long time, staring at the steam rising from the mug, wishing it held answers instead of caffeine. I knew I had a choice. I could say no. I could stand my ground, tell her that I wasn't interested, that I couldn't stomach the thought of sharing her with someone else. But what then? I could already picture the way the conversation would go. She would nod, force a smile, and tell me she understood. But behind that, there would be disappointment, something neither of us could ignore. And if I said no, would she even listen? Or had she already made her decision? I heard the soft padding of her footsteps before she spoke. "You didn't sleep," Corinne said gently, leaning against the kitchen doorway. I took a sip of my coffee, the bitterness grounding me. How could I? She sighed, wrapping her arms around herself. Linden, I never meant to upset you. I exhaled slowly, but you knew you would. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over and reached for a mug, filling it with coffee before sitting across from me at the small breakfast table. I knew it would be a shock, she admitted, but I also know that we've always been open with each other. We talk about things. We don't let fear make decisions for us. I let out a dry laugh. You mean I don't let fear make decisions for us? She frowned. That's not fair. Isn't it? I shot back, my voice quieter than I expected. Because, Corinne, I can't shake the feeling that this isn't actually a discussion, that it's something you already want, maybe even something you've already started. Her face fell. That's not true. Then tell me this, I said, leaning forward. If I say no, completely, absolutely no, will that be the end of it? Or will you resent me for it? The silence between us was louder than anything she could have said. I closed my eyes for a second, forcing myself to breathe. Yeah, I whispered. That's what I thought. She reached for my hand. Linden, please. Just don't make this into something ugly. I love you. I love us. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I want more, but not less of you. Never less of you. I stared at our hands, at the contrast of her delicate fingers against my own. So that was it. I knew the moment she said those words that I had already lost. If I refused, it wouldn't end here. Maybe not immediately, but eventually, she would look at me and see the man who held her back, who kept her from exploring this new version of herself. And that kind of resentment, slow and creeping, was worse than outright betrayal. It was the kind of thing that festered. So I did what I always did. I swallowed my emotions, pushed down the part of me that wanted to scream, and nodded. Okay, I said. She blinked. Okay. I forced a smile. We can try it. See where it goes. The relief on her face was immediate. She reached forward, cupping my face in her hands. You have no idea how much this means to me. I had an idea, but as she kissed me, murmuring reassurances against my lips, I realized something. I wasn't saying yes because I believed in this. I was saying yes because I wanted to see how far she was willing to go, and how far I could let myself go before everything inside me shattered completely. That night, she brought up rules. I don't want secrets between us, she said as we lay in bed, her fingers tracing small circles on my arm. We tell each other everything. Who we're seeing, what we're doing. No sneaking around, no hiding. I swallowed. And if one of us isn't comfortable? She hesitated. Then we stop. We figure it out together. I turned my head to look at her. Promise? She smiled, pressing a kiss to my forehead. I promise. And for a while, I almost believed her. But deep down, in the quiet parts of my mind I tried to ignore, I already knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. I tried to convince myself I had control, that agreeing to this was some kind of power move, a way to keep Corinne from walking down a path I couldn't follow. But the truth was, the moment I said yes, I had already started losing her. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a shift in the wind. She was more affectionate in those early days, as if my agreement had lifted some invisible weight off her shoulders. She held my hand more, kissed me longer, looked at me with something almost like admiration. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had made the right choice. Then came the first time. Corinne sat across from me at dinner, twirling her fork in a plate of spaghetti, her nails tapping anxiously against the wood of the table. So, there's someone I want to see, she said, carefully, as if she were testing the weight of each word before letting it go. I forced my expression to stay neutral. Oh, his name is Elliot, she said, watching me closely. We've been talking for a little while. I think I'd like to meet up with him. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the bitterness coat my tongue. How long is a little while? Her fingers tensed around her fork. A couple of weeks. I set my glass down, staring at her. So before we even talked about this, you were already looking? It wasn't like that, she insisted. I wasn't planning anything, Linden. We met through a mutual friend, and we just clicked. Clicked. The word sat heavy between us, thick with unspoken meaning. I swallowed the knot in my throat and nodded. Okay. Okay. She blinked. Just like that? I forced a tight smile. This is what you wanted, right? She exhaled, visibly relieved. Yes, but only if you're okay with it. What choice did I have? I gave her my best reassuring nod and reached for my glass again. Yeah, Corinne, I'm fine. I wasn't. The night she went out with him, I sat on the couch, staring at my phone. I told myself I wouldn't check the time, but I did, every 5 minutes. 8 p.m., 9:13 p.m., 10:42 p.m. She wasn't home. I had spent the past decade knowing, almost instinctively, where she was at any given moment. If she wasn't with me, she was at work, or out with friends, or at her mother's house. But tonight, she was with him. I didn't even know what he looked like, didn't know how he spoke, or what kind of cologne he wore, or whether he made her laugh in that breathless way she used to when we first fell in love. For the first time in my marriage, Corinne was somewhere I couldn't reach her, and I hated it. At 11:23 p.m., she texted me. Corinne, on my way home. Love you. I stared at the words on the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Love you. 2 simple words, one she had sent me 1,000 times before. But tonight, they felt different. I typed back a quick, love you too. And then I waited. When she walked through the door just after midnight, she was glowing. It wasn't anything obvious. No lipstick smudges, no disheveled hair. But I knew. I knew. She kicked off her heels and gave me a sleepy smile. Hey. Hey. I said, my voice even. How was it? She hesitated for half a second, then shrugged. It was nice. We got drinks, talked for a while. He's really easy to be around. Easy to be around. I nodded, ignoring the knot in my stomach. Good. She came closer, wrapping her arms around my neck. Thank you, she whispered against my cheek, for trusting me, for being okay with this. I closed my eyes as she pressed a soft kiss to my lips. I didn't tell her that I wasn't okay, because, at that moment, I realized the truth. She had already taken her first step away from me, and no matter how tightly I held on, she wasn't mine anymore. The days that followed felt like living in someone else's life. Corinne was different, subtly at first, in ways that might have seemed insignificant to anyone else. She was happier, lighter, like something inside her had been unlocked, like the weight of monogamy, the weight of me, had been lifted from her shoulders. She hummed to herself when she cooked, smiled more at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, and when she kissed me, when she wrapped her arms around me at night, I could feel it. The distance. At first, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was just adjusting to something new, that things hadn't really changed, that she was still my Corinne, but deep down, I knew. I was losing her. She saw Elliot again the following weekend, then again a few days after that. Each time, she'd come home late, glowing, her laughter just a little too breathless, her energy electric. And me? I became the man who waited. I stopped asking too many questions because I was afraid of the answers. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes for a text. I started pretending it didn't bother me, like some part of me hadn't begun to wither every time she walked out that door. One night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I had to take control. If this was going to be our open marriage, then it was time for me to participate. I downloaded a dating app. It felt ridiculous at first. Uploading photos, filling out a bio like I was some 25-year-old fresh out of college. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the profile settings, before finally typing something simple, just looking to meet new people, exploring something different. The first few matches were meaningless. A couple of women messaged me, asking what I was looking for. I gave vague, non-committal answers. None of them felt right. Then I met Naomi. She was different. Not in an overwhelming, fireworks and dramatic music kind of way. Just easy. She was an artist, working in some small gallery downtown. She had a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed without forcing it. We texted back and forth for a few days before she finally said, "Want to meet up?" No pressure, Just coffee? I hesitated before answering. Not because I didn't want to, but because the idea of stepping into this new reality felt wrong. But then I thought about Corinne, thought about how effortlessly she had embraced this life. And so, with a deep breath, I typed back, "Sure, let's do it." The night of my first date, Corinne was getting ready to go out with Elliot again. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her earring, her dress hugging her body in a way that I used to think was just for me. "You look nice," I said. She smiled at me in the reflection. "Thanks." I hesitated before adding, "I'm going out too. Meeting someone for coffee." For the briefest moment, something flickered across her face. A pause. A shift. But then, just as quickly, she smiled again. "That's great, Linden," she said. "I hope you have a good time." And with that, she grabbed her purse and walked out the door. Naomi was waiting for me at a small cafe downtown, tucked into a corner booth with a cup of tea in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, giving me a warm smile. "Hey, stranger." I exhaled, some of the tension in my chest easing. "Hey." We talked for 2 hours. About nothing and everything. About art and music, about childhood stories and favorite books. She made me laugh, really laugh, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't suffocating. When the night ended, she didn't ask to come home with me. She just touched my arm lightly and said, "Let me know if you want to do this again." I watched her walk away, my thoughts a tangled mess. I had expected to feel guilt, shame, some kind of confirmation that this wasn't for me. But instead, I felt nothing, just an emptiness I couldn't explain. And as I drove home that night, one thought kept circling my mind. This wasn't fixing anything. It was only making it worse. I pulled into the driveway that night, gripping the steering wheel for a long moment before getting out of the car. The house was dark except for the dim glow of a lamp in the living room. Corinne wasn't home yet. I wasn't surprised. I stepped inside, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. I had done it. I had gone on a date. And yet, I felt nothing. Naomi had been great. She was smart, funny, easy to talk to. But she wasn't Corinne. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a game where we were both on equal footing. I wasn't looking for something more. I wasn't looking to replace Corinne. But Corinne? She was. I could feel it in the way she looked at me less, in the way she laughed more when she was with someone else. She had walked through a door that I was still standing in front of, too afraid to cross, too afraid to close. She came home late. I heard the keys jingle at the door, the soft click as she turned the lock. I stayed on the couch, pretending to watch TV, even though the screen was just a blur of moving colors. "Hey," she said, stepping inside. "Hey," I replied, my voice flat. She kicked off her heels, tossing her purse onto the counter. Her hair was slightly messy, her lipstick faded. "How was your night?" she asked, stretching like she had just run a marathon. I forced a smile. "Good. Naomi's nice." She nodded. "Yeah." I swallowed. "Yeah." And then silence. She didn't ask more, didn't probe, because, for her, it didn't matter. And that's when I knew. I had done this to keep her close, to make sure she wouldn't pull away from me completely. But in the process, I had let her go. Days passed, then weeks. We saw other people. We played our roles. We pretended this was making us stronger. But in reality, it was unraveling everything we had built. We weren't talking like we used to. We weren't laughing like we used to. The intimacy we once shared was slowly being replaced by something artificial. I started to feel like a placeholder in my own marriage. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to notice. Or maybe she did. Maybe she just didn't care. One night, I reached for her. It was late. She was lying in bed, scrolling through her phone, her screen lighting up her face in flashes of soft blue. "Corinne," I murmured, touching her arm. She looked at me, her eyes tired. "Yeah." I hesitated. I wanted to tell her I missed her. I wanted to ask if she still saw me the same way, if I still meant something to her. But instead, all I said was, "Are we okay?" She blinked, then smiled. "Of course we are." Then she rolled over, turning off the lamp, leaving me staring at the ceiling in the dark. And for the first time since this all began, I finally admitted it to myself. We weren't okay. We weren't anything anymore. We were just two people sharing the same space, pretending we still had something worth holding on to. And I didn't know how much longer I could take it. The illusion couldn't last forever. Something inside me had been unraveling for weeks, slowly at first, like a tiny thread pulling loose in an old sweater. But now the whole thing was coming apart. Corinne had stopped pretending. She used to at least try to balance things, to reassure me that this was our experience, something we were going through together. But now, she didn't even bother hiding how much she loved this new life. One evening, she was getting ready for yet another date. I watched her from the doorway of our bedroom as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her necklace. She was humming. She only hummed when she was excited about something. I used to think it was cute, one of those little things you love about a person when you've been with them long enough. Now, it felt like a knife to the chest. "You're seeing Elliot again?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She nodded, meeting my gaze in the mirror. "Yeah, we're going to that new wine bar downtown." I crossed my arms. "You've been seeing him a lot." Something flickered across her face, but she recovered quickly. "We get along well," she said with a shrug. I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, I've noticed." She turned then, really looking at me. "Linden, what's going on?" I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. "Nothing." "It doesn't feel like nothing." I hesitated. This was it. The moment I either confronted her or kept swallowing everything until it broke me completely. So I said it. "I don't think this is working." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't look surprised. She just studied me, like she was trying to decide whether or not to fight. After a long pause, she spoke. "Is it really not working? Or is it just not working for you?" I felt the words like a slap. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Because she was right. She was fine. She was thriving. It was me who was drowning. And the worst part? She knew. She had known for weeks, maybe even months. And she had chosen to keep going anyway. I swallowed hard, pushing down the lump in my throat. I don't feel like your husband anymore. I feel like your roommate. Like someone you check in with between dates." Her face softened slightly. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" I shot back. "When's the last time we had a real conversation? When's the last time you looked at me the way you look at him?" She flinched at that. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was empty. She turned back to the mirror, adjusting her earring, buying herself time. "I don't want to lose you, Linden," she said finally. "But I also don't want to lose this. This. Not us. This. The life she had built without me." I let out a slow breath, my hands curling into fists at my sides. "I can't do this anymore, Corinne." Her reflection froze. I saw the muscles in her jaw tighten. "What does that mean?" "It means—" My voice cracked, but I forced myself to continue. "It means I don't think we can fix this. I think we're too far gone." Silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she turned to face me completely. And for the first time since this all began, I saw it. Not anger. Not guilt. Not even sadness. Just acceptance. Like she had been expecting this all along. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice quiet. I swallowed. "I don't know." She nodded slowly. "Okay. Just okay. Not please don't go. Not we can fix this. Just okay." I turned and walked out of the bedroom. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I finally understood. She had already let me go, long before I was ready to let go of her. The next morning, I packed a bag. I didn't have a plan. No destination. No carefully thought-out strategy. Just an overwhelming need to escape before I became a ghost in my own life. Corinne was still asleep when I slipped out of bed. I stood there for a long moment, watching her, wondering if she'd wake up and stop me, wondering if she'd ask me to stay. But she didn't. So I turned, walked out of the room, and started gathering my things. By the time she came downstairs, I was zipping up my duffel bag. Her gaze flickered to it, then back to me. "You're really doing this?" It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Yeah." She exhaled, running a hand through her hair. "Where are you going?" I shrugged. "Does it matter?" Something in her expression wavered. "Linden, I waited for her to finish the sentence. But she didn't. Because there was nothing left to say. She had already chosen her path. and I had finally chosen mine. I slung the bag over my shoulder and stepped toward the door. Take care, Corinne. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't even ask if I'd come back. She just stood there, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line, watching me leave like I was just another chapter she had already finished reading. And just like that, I was gone. I drove for hours, the road stretching endlessly ahead of me. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't check my phone, just let the silence swallow me whole. At some point, I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of a small town. I paid in cash, checked in under a name that wasn't mine, and collapsed onto the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, I was truly alone. No obligations, no expectations, no one waiting for me to come home. I thought I'd feel free. Instead, I just felt hollow. I reached for my phone, hesitating before unlocking it. Dozens of missed texts from friends, family, people who had no idea that my life had imploded overnight. But from Corinne? Nothing. I don't know why that hurt more than anything else. Maybe I had been naive. Maybe some part of me still believed she'd call, that she'd ask me to come back, that she'd fight for us. But she didn't. Because she had already made peace with losing me long before I had made peace with losing her. And I had no one to blame but myself. I had let her dreams swallow me whole. And now, I was nothing more than a shadow in the life we once shared. That night, lying in a motel room that smelled of cheap air freshener and regret, I finally understood. She hadn't been the one who left first. I had. I had been leaving, piece by piece, from the moment I agreed to something I didn't want. From the moment I let her convince me that love could survive being shared. From the moment I stopped being honest with myself about what I needed. And now? Now I had nothing left to lose. Because I had already lost the one thing that mattered most. Myself. I woke up the next morning with a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in a long time, there was no weight on my chest. No waiting for Corinne to come home. No pretending I was okay. Just me. And the open road. I spent the next few weeks in motion, driving from town to town, staying in cheap motels, eating at diners where no one knew my name. It should have been lonely. But for the first time in years, I wasn't drowning in someone else's version of happiness. I was finally learning what I wanted. One afternoon, I stopped at a little coffee shop in a town I couldn't even remember the name of. It was quiet, the kind of place where people still smiled at strangers. And that's when I met Ellis. She wasn't like Corinne. She wasn't a whirlwind of chaos, always searching for something just out of reach. She was steady, grounded. She had a laugh that made you feel like you belonged. We talked for hours that day, long after my coffee had gone cold. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't haunted by what I had lost. I was just there, in that moment, and it felt good. It felt right. A few months later, I found a small apartment in a quiet town by the coast. Nothing fancy, just a place that was mine. I started writing again. I reconnected with old friends. I rebuilt the pieces of myself that I had let crumble. And Corinne? She reached out once. A simple text. Corinne, I hope you're doing okay. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Me? I am. And for the first time in a long time, it was the truth. I used to think losing her was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. But now I see that losing myself would have been worse. And walking away? That was the best thing I ever did.